going to say this, and I'm going to say it just once.
This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, in the second hour of this live broadcast. And as mentioned before the break, we're going to be joined right now by author, political commentator, editor, founder of jaysanalysis.com. He's also, I think, a great student of religious studies, especially to do with the Orthodox Church globally and also history around these issues. What's happening in Ukraine right now, we'll just bring this article up on screen here, of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is targeted by the current Zelensky government. And they're wanting to ban this. This is a featured article, a special report we put up at 21st Century Wire. Zelensky delayed banning the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in order to secure U.S. funding. That's certainly what it looks like, according to the evidence. But the scenes that we're seeing in Ukraine are just pretty unbelievable. And the irony of this as well, Jay, I'll get into some of the ironic points of this, but I just want to get your, reaction to this situation as it's unfolding right now in Ukraine.
Well, I think it's kind of ridiculous because it kind of shows the farcical nature of everything that this regime claims to be about. Claims to oppose the tyranny supposedly of Russia, and yet this regime is itself far beyond the tyranny that we see anywhere else, pretty much in the world. In fact, I don't think most nation states today typically shut down various religious groups to this degree. So this is really kind of an outrage, but it's not surprising given the fact that it makes perfect sense with Washington's geopolitical strategy to divide the unity of these peoples, these nation states. And one of the key ways to do that is culture, and religion is, of course, a huge element of culture. So they have to split the religions down the middle to really try to manage these regions in terms of the Pax Americana.
And we saw the scenes not just a few weeks ago, Jay, we have here from a video clip we'll show, but there's no sound on this, but it's basically trucks up in a demolition operation of a very important monastery located in Kiev. And we have this clip now. We'll go ahead and roll that. But this is these trucks taking these, preparing to take the contents, and not only they seizing the property, expropriating church property, seizing assets, demolishing monasteries, arresting clergy and canonical leaders in the church, and filing criminal charges against them, including a patriarch. I mean, yeah, it's unbelievable.
And setting up a facsimile, mirrored, fake, pro-Western CIA installed church. So they took this character, Dominko, they made their own patriarch of the Ukrainian, the nationalist church, supposedly. The irony is that a lot of the people that were put into that sphere in power had already previously been rejected in the past. In fact, some years ago, Patriarch Bartholomew himself had rejected these people as in any way canonical. He then later reversed that position when Washington put pressure on him. So, there's a lot of elements at play here, including a lot of religious subversion from universities. I believe the Fordham University, which is a big, Jesuit and CIA connected university in America, they played a key role in a lot of the ideological subversion. A lot of ecumenist entities were set up. Even Protestant and evangelical churches were used to push an anti-Russian message, as well as I said, this sort of parallel ecclesiastical structure that was set up. So all of that, it makes perfect sense why that's the explanation for why they're doing this. I don't understand why they would demolish these entities unless there's something else going on that perhaps is even a kind of a middle finger to Orthodox Christianity. We know that, what was it last year? Zelensky gave this weird icon where the image was all blacked out. So this is almost, again, some kind of weird kind of a middle finger to Orthodox Christianity. So yeah, it's pretty dark stuff. Obviously, we can tell the figure of Zelensky is a kind of a drug-addled, unstable individual. So it's not surprising, but I don't know why they wouldn't just confiscate it unless they intended to demolish it to offend people.
The irony is that under Zelensky, Poroshenko as well, ever since the Maidan, Jay, all these governments have gone out of their way to basically expunge any, reminders of the Soviet era or, the Russian dominance before. And this is exactly what the Bolsheviks did after 1917. They shut down the churches, they burned the churches, they arrested religious leaders. I mean, so the irony of that is quite unbelievable. And this is the democratic Ukraine that the West is saying that, we need to risk going to World War III. We need to drag Europe potentially into a third world war to defend this bastion of freedom and democracy in Ukraine. And this story, more than any, this story, there's not even basic religious freedom in Ukraine. I mean, and this should catch the attention of at least Republicans and conservatives, Jay, but we're still waiting.
Yeah, the entities that are used as part of these cutouts, the National Endowment for Democracy, all these sorts of humanitarian organizations, which are fronts, obviously, for what the CIA used to do in the pre-Reagan era. They're there to subvert. They're there to engage in this kind of foreign entanglement manipulation. It's the Gene Sharp model of a democratic revolution, which is supposedly non-violent or whatever, but really it's just subversive. And it's again, as you said, an ultimate portrayal of contradiction that everybody can see, because most people think of basic rights or whatever. They think of something like religious freedom as one of those. So to have this democracy, America wants to promote democracy everywhere in the world. And yet when democracy comes into play, it ends up being this ridiculously heavy-handed, destructive, locking down, shutting down everything that's even remotely critical, which is, I think, a sign of weakness. Why would you have to be that heavy-handed unless you were in a kind of a fragile, weak position? But ultimately, I think the whole American regime is kind of showing signs of weakness, because we wouldn't have to be engaging in all this if we actually had a strong base. We've seen, in fact, Trump, all these things, the unpopularity of Biden. This is really showing the weakening of the Western power bloc. It's beginning to lose. It doesn't have soft power, so it has to now rely on these heavy-handed lunatics.
And we showed you the trucks were involved in the demolition of the Tithe Monastery, the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Kiev. But we also, here's footage of another Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Luhansk that was destroyed. I think we've got some footage of this. We'll put that up on screen. But there you can see, I believe that's an icon of the Archangel Gabriel, if I'm not mistaken, but just surviving here. But this is not an uncommon scene right now in Ukraine. And you look at just the significance of this, Jay, and I think a lot of Americans might have a problem putting this into perspective. Now, this would be like, imagine if Gavin Newsom made a decree in California, population between 30 and 40 million, very similar to Ukraine in size, and outlaw the Catholic Church in the biggest and oldest institution in California, religious institution, basically criminalized it, and then seized all the properties of the Catholic Church in California. That's
under democracy, under the guise of democracy. Or
subversion or something like this. That's kind of the basis of what they're doing in Ukraine. But Jay, would that be the equivalent in terms of Orthodox? Is that a decent comparison?
That's a great comparison. And of course, Orthodoxy is not limited to Russia. Russia does have obviously a large degree of spiritual influence in the Orthodox world. But there's millions and millions of Orthodox Christians outside of Russia, many other countries who are, again, the target of this on a large scale, because this falls over into the domain of Constantinople, the ecumenical patriarchate. And unfortunately, it's become very evident. Jim Jotras and others have written really in-depth analyses of how the patriarch has been compromised. And he played a key role in siding with Washington on this, reversing, again, his older stances, which wouldn't have happened had he not really been subservient. But you can actually go back to Cold War era where even there was, I think, Athenagoras and others who have their cables have been declassified, speaking to Alan Dulles, speaking to Bill Donovan, speaking to people in the CIA and the OSS, basically saying, well, we're here to do whatever you want. And unfortunately, that relationship seems to have continued to where these people basically just do what the State Department tells them to do. And other entities like Fordham University, it's not just Fordham, but they're a key element here. Other universities, Canadian universities, play a key role too in pushing a lot of this stuff in that domain. And it's not just the Orthodox world, it's the same stuff in the Roman Catholic world, where you've got the Western intelligence power structure really wanting to subvert, really wanting to control the Roman Church and steer it in the direction it wants. So this is a serious problem that people need to understand. It's not just this obscure Orthodox thing halfway across the world. It plays into the geopolitical machinations of the deep state at a very, very powerful level. I don't know how else to say it. And you're absolutely right that the comparisons that you make are very apt.
And you're talking about the patriarch, I believe, Bartholomew of Constantinople earlier. It's who gave that recognition, the autocephaly recognition, to this new Ukrainian church. So they're banning the Ukrainian church, Orthodox Church, and replacing it with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Rough English translation there, but then that was recognized by Patriarch Bartholomew in Constantinople, who a lot of people accuse, not just, I've heard you talk about his relationship with Western intelligence, but you're not the only one. And this is well documented and spoken about by a lot of different authors, analysts, and historians. And the point is, Jay, is how important is playing on these schisms, playing on sectarian divisions, religious divisions, when it comes to ruling. If you want to rule, if you want to have a world order where you're in control and you're steering events from past empires till the present, how important is controlling faith, controlling countries, religions?
Yeah, I think you and I were talking not too long ago about this new academic text that came out by a guy named Michael Graziano. And the book is called Aaron into the Wilderness, The History of the CIA and Religion. I read the text. I did some talks on it. It's a really good book. It's not a conspiracy book. It's just a mainline academic study. And, this is really important, obviously, in the Cold War. The CIA found this to be, it's not their most important aspect, but according to Graziano's analysis, it's one of the most important. It's up there. It's very crucial to soft power, to cultural control, cultural management. That's a big part of what goes on. It's not just about warfare, tanks, and soldiers. It's also about extending, as we said, soft power, cultural influence, Hollywood influence, and religious influence. So, and this could include, much more nefarious things than just paying off a bishop or a patriarch. It includes things like sexual compromise. I just finished reading actually 2 different books on this topic of how prevalent this was in even going back to World War I. There was a lot of sexual compromise. World War II, the Germans did this. The Allies typically try to pretend like they didn't do this, but in fact they did as well. The CIA has had many love nests of their own. We think about figures like Jeffrey Epstein, who for sure was working in some capacity with multiple intelligence agencies. Some of those details might be a little murky, but we can at least surmise that much. And even though that's the entertainment sphere and the scientific sphere and the political sphere, it's not limited to that. There have been many prelates who've been compromised. I think a lot of the pedophilia in the Roman Catholic Church played into Benedict's stepping down. But it's not just limited there. It's also in the world of orthodoxy too. Unfortunately, you can have because human beings are human beings. They're susceptible to the same weaknesses and the same potentiality of being compromised. So all of this goes on in the religious world as well. And as you said, yeah, it's absolutely crucial to steering culture. But again, that's a mainline academic book admitting the very point that no, at Washington, State Department, they see, they have countless universities working on ways to subvert, control, and manipulate and influence culture, including religion. There have been programs.
That's really important.
Created multiple CIA programs. The doctrinal warfare program. Ed Lansdale was engaged in a lot of these operations using religion, so it's well known.
So and why is it so important, Jay? Because is it because the church, let's compare it to a communist society during the Soviet Union, where you didn't have that buffer between the state and the people, but in the new Russia you do. The Orthodox Church has moved in to become very influential politically and even on a policy level, or the direction in which the country is going. It's now playing a preeminent role, whereas it didn't for so long. Why is that? Is that in some Catholic countries it plays a different role than in others, depending on how secular they are. France is a good example versus, let's say, a South American country, for instance. But explain that dynamic, because I think that's an important aspect of this conversation.
Yeah, there was a great documentary. Actually, it was unintentionally great because I think it was made by the BBC or one of the British outfits, and it was about the history of Bolshevism and the major characters that played key roles. One of those was a lesser known woman who's actually pretty important. Her name was Alexandra Kollontai, and she was sort of the Bolshevik woman in charge of like male female issues, and so she was a huge promoter of open relationships, full on polyamorous stuff. And they had this crisis after her policies were put into effect, where by the time that Stalin came to power, they had this epidemic of thieves, young men who had been raised by single moms. They didn't have fathers. So it was a huge cultural problem. And even Stalin recognized that in order for the society to at least cohere and not completely collapse, they would have to bring back at least some elements of the family. And even though he wanted to kind of have a more or less an NKVD controlled Orthodox Church, he at least understood that it needed to be there for social cohesion. So I'm not saying that makes Stalin a good guy. I'm just saying that that's the facts of the transition from the Bolsheviks and then Trotsky to Stalin. So you can see a window into that where we get the idea that religion plays a key role in social cohesion. And if you're a purely pragmatic state motivated ruler, you want to make sure that these religious guys over here are under your control. There's a great movie that exemplifies this from the Middle Ages. You've probably seen it with Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole, called Becket. And of course, the king wants to make sure that the archbishop is, who was his drinking buddy, does what he wants. And so Becket doesn't do what the king wants, and Becket ends up being taken care of. So I think that's just the practical motivation on the part of the state. It tends to want to just ensure that the church doesn't have too much independent power. It needs to do what the state wants. So there's no easy answers as to how that's supposed to work. But I think you're absolutely right there that secular states, or even I guess you could say the West is basically a secular state. They want to ensure that the church in these regions is really just an arm of Americanism. And I needn't go any further than C.D. Jackson's well-known declassified program called the Doctrinal Warfare Program, which was to ensure that all the religious entities, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, whatever, in the American sphere, that their number one goal was Americanism. You can believe whatever you want after that. You just have to be an agent and a missionary for Americanism.
It's interesting as well. You bring up that's a cinematic masterpiece, the film Becket, one of the great Peter O'Toole performances, Richard Burton. But on that front, Jay, does that make Zelensky a sort of latter-day Henry VIII in what he's trying to pull off? I'm just throwing that out there, Jay.
Well, Henry VIII seemed to at least prefer having a bunch of wives and mistresses. Is that what I think Zelensky's into? More of the black leather type of stuff, it looks like. I don't know.
He has other proclivities. This is true. This is no secret. I've got a clip, but in all seriousness, we've got a clip here. One of the religious leaders from Kiev basically making a public plea, really explaining how extreme and how dire the situation is right now in Ukraine. Let's go ahead and roll this. This is one of the patriarchs, I believe, in Kiev. We'll play this. It's subtitled as well.
Нам дали время 2 недели. До 29 марта выселится с обители. Мы не сможем этого сделать ни под каким предлогом, потому что за 35 лет братья сделали все то, чтобы благоустроить жизнь для монахов, для паломников. Здесь у нас все то, что необходимо для жизни. Кухня 1/2, вышивальный цех, прачечная, потому что много приезжает паломников. Сегодня у нас нету места, нас некуда все это возить. Оставлять мы ничего не намерены. Почему? Если государство так поступает, оставить для чего? Для того, чтобы разворовали, как это было в 1917 году? Или сегодня так они поступают со своим народом?
As we were saying, Jay, he said it right there. This is like a repeat of 1917. So, I mean, pretty incredible, and more incredible that there's no pushback, especially from the U.S. There's one, I think, one body in Washington, D.C., an international body that has issued a report on this. We've detailed this at 21st Century Wire, but it's not nearly enough, I think, to bring this to a level that it deserves. If this was happening in any other country, there would be international outrage, but because it's happening here and because it's happening to the Russian Orthodox Church, there's no outrage and almost nil coverage on this, Jay.
Yeah, Russians are all bad and evil, right? I mean, that's what we're supposed to think. So you can't humanize anybody in the Russian church or anything like that, because they're all somehow amorphously, everybody's under Putin. Although attending a Russian Orthodox church for the last several years, I don't think Putin's come up once in the many years that I've been there. So it's really kind of an exaggeration, and the West needs to have this boogeyman thing. I think you did a brilliant piece some years back where you were kind of cataloging all the times that the Hitler meme has been used. Essentially, everybody since Saddam, right, has been called Hitler, right? Assad is Hitler, Saddam is Hitler, Putin's Hitler, everybody's Hitler. But it's all kind of ridiculous because the 1917 comparison is apt. If you read the writings of Dr. Carol Quigley or Professor Anthony Sutton, Bolshevik revolution was run out of New York and out of New York and London. So the Bolshevik revolution was funded. We even know the address of the complex, essentially run by Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Schiff, Warburg, etc. And so they really wanted that Bolshevik revolution to occur. And it's apt to compare it again to the same Western power structure, again, doing another type of supposed democratic revolution here.
And I think Tucker Carlson's probably one of the only, kind of high-profile media people in the U.S. that he had Robert Amsterdam on, as international human rights lawyer, who was kind of, trying to shine a light on this current situation here. And, like I said, if this was censured by the State Department, I mean, certainly it's worthy of a press conference, considering how many church journalists there are in the United States, publications, various denominations of Christianity. I mean, this should be of a very high level of interest, because the point is, I think, is if this is allowed to happen here, it does set a very dangerous precedent from a U.S. supported state or U.S. supported government or regime. It almost opens the door to similar abuses in other countries, or dare I say, Jay, one day, if this, often we see what the U.S. allows or sanctions or supports overseas sometimes manifests itself back on the domestic front. And certainly that's something that people should be aware of. We're talking about police states, lawfare that the U.S. has promoted overseas to overthrow regimes. We're seeing the same lawfare happen right now in the weaponization of the justice system. I don't think the church, it's out of the realms of possibility that you would see. In fact, some would say you're seeing this now, Jay, in the U.S. with the recent reports of the FBI profiling trad Catholics and things like this.
Yeah, they visited Orthodox. They visited Orthodox priests and churches as well. Absolutely. So there was a write-up, I think, in one of the big foreign policy magazines 6 months ago, essentially saying that the entire network of Russian Orthodox churches in America is an outlet and a secret tool for Putin. Of course, this is all absurd if you know the history, because the history of a lot of the churches, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia goes back to the Cold War, where you had people, white Russians immigrate, people fleeing the Bolsheviks, and at that time. I'm not a big fan of Western intelligence per se, but at that time you had Western intelligence helping some of those people flee. And so this is the real origins of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, like in America and other places, and in Europe too. It is actually out of opposing the Bolsheviks, leaving Russia to find a free life. But then, of course, now that's all flipped, and if you're an immigrant, I mean, I was at a chapel not too long ago. I won't say where, but we had some of the descendants of the Romanovs came, and so they were visiting the parish. They're not Soviets, they're not KGB, but you have people in America that are so sort of dumbed down. They actually think that the KGB hasn't existed in like 30 years. They will believe the neocon narrative that essentially Putin is running this KGB operation through all these Russian Orthodox churches, which is just simply not true. It's kind of silly, but it plays well in the media, as you're pointing out, for kind of finding and picking out villains. And last thing I'll say on that is that it reminds me too of something that a point you made many, many years ago that is, I think, very insightful, which is that you're only supposed to have outrage about the cause célèbre. You're only supposed to have outrage about it's selective outrage, because there's a lot of atrocities going on in the world, but they don't want us to have outrage about this. You're supposed to be outraged about these other things over here. And it's whatever really Washington decides you need to be outraged about.
I mean, the obvious point here is, and I say this too, like whatever, especially I'm tough on conservatives, especially constitutional conservatives and libertarians, Jay, because they do lay out quite let's say a passionate political stall when it comes to constitutional issues. So whatever is near and dear to the American libertarian or constitutionalist conservative's heart, like free speech, like freedom of religious expression, like freedom of assembly, like equal rights under the law. We're all about that domestically, but when it comes to internationally in U.S. policy, we sort of suspend all of these constitutional principles time and time again. And the thing we want to export is we're backing Nazis, radicals, ISIS, or in the case of Israel, quite a horrific situation that has unfolded there in Gaza. So there's this disconnect, and I think that inconsistency, I think, is a problem. The religious freedom thing is really dangerous, because that's a real fine line once you start playing with this. And we can talk about other areas, Jay, but the religious aspect and religious freedom is a absolute bedrock of the United States of America. Its literal founding pilgrims came on the Mayflower to escape religious persecution in England and in Holland as well. So, I mean, that's why I think this is key. And I think it also is emblematic of the way in which the West is trying to divide Europe along these various lines, culturally, but also religiously as well. But your thoughts on this, Jay?
Yeah, I think you're hitting at this key point that a lot of people, especially on Twitter, are figuring out, which is the contradictions and the hypocrisy involved in what we call Con Inc. And I think that's the best term for conservative Inc., conservative incorporated, because they're really just there to be gatekeepers. We have for so many years Fox News as kind of the established gatekeeper for neoconservatism and for the boomers. The younger generations aren't watching, they don't care about Fox News. What are they into? Well, we got to find placeholders to put up their, Daily Wire, this kind of stuff. That's the new version of Fox News for the, I guess, Gen X and millennials. But I think the cracks are already there in this system. People are beginning to figure out that all these people, these talking heads, these gatekeepers really have the double standards, and everybody's seen it out in the open in the last year. So hopefully this will help people to sort of wake up. and realize that you're either consistent or you're not. And if you're not consistent, then you kind of are really just admitting that you're a shill of sorts. You're really just there to promote the paid agenda, whoever those paid masters might be, foreign governments, as you talked about there, DC, whatever.
And before we break, Jay, and I appreciate you joining us on this. It's a very important story, obviously, and we're really happy that you've also taken interest in this. Give our listeners, if they're not familiar with your work, indication of where they can find you, where they can support your work as well, and what you've got coming up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jay Dyer, jaysanalysis.com. You can find me at my website. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, under my name. I will be doing a live event June 22nd with some friends and my wife in Las Vegas. So go ahead and head on over to my Twitter, and you get the link there to the Eventbrite, and you can get tickets for that event. It's a big 6-hour epic infotainment event. There'll be comedy. There'll be lectures, geopolitics. We're going to get into all of it. And then I host the 4th hour of Alex Jones every Friday. That's about it. You can find me on Twitter, and I usually do a lot of debates, geopolitics, movie analysis, all of that.
You're still, we'll give you an opportunity to put a flyer. You're still looking for a type of a Catholic debate opponent. I think you tweeted something out recently. You haven't had any takers?
That's an offer that I've had for a year. I've had a year offer for, and it can be a scholar, academic. I've reached out to multiple Catholic historians. I'd really like to debate the geopolitics of the papacy. I've not seen anyone do this. People are always debating the theological elements of the papacy, but I've never seen anybody debate the geopolitical entanglements. I think that'd be a fascinating debate. It's hard to find an opponent, though.
I think, you got to keep advertising, but that would be a great debate. So we definitely want to see that happen. That's definitely something I think a lot of people would want to see, especially with what's going on in the world right now. Jay Dyer, jaysanalysis.com, author, philosopher, political commentator, comedian, and also you want to catch Jay at his events, which are coming up. You mentioned the big one in Las Vegas. Go to jaysanalysis.com. We'll drop that into the TNT chat community as well, Jay, so the TNT community knows about these things. But appreciate you joining us this week on today's News Talk.
Thank you, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Jay Dyer. Again, follow Jay and his work. He's one of the best out there right now. We appreciate him joining us. Let's take a break right now with the network, and when we come back, we'll wrap it up for this Wednesday, a powerful broadcast. We'll have more coming up in just a few minutes. Stay there.